I'm Cornell Clayton, Director of the Foley Institute. On behalf of the Foley Institute, let me welcome you out to this, not our last, but our second to last event in this election series. Our last event will be next Tuesday. But today, we have our every 4-year panel that predicts the election. And I'm not going to go into long introductions because many of you know most of these people. They've all been here before. They're all eminent political scientists, amongst the most eminent in the Pacific Northwest. And we have with us Travis Ridout, who's on the far end of the table, Carolyn Long in the middle, and Todd Donovan. Travis, of course, is here on the Pullman campus at WSU. Carolyn Long is at WSU Vancouver. And Todd Donovan is at Western Washington University. And so I've asked each of them to take about 5 to 10 minutes to talk about what they think is the most interesting aspects of this election, and then to give me particular predictions for each of these. So we'll see how they come out, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So we'll start with Travis.
All right, well, thank you, Cornell. I want to start with a mental health check-in. Let me tell you how I'm feeling right now. I'm feeling like I'm waiting for a phone call from my doctor who's going to tell me about the results of the biopsy. And my real fear is my doctor's going to call and say the tests are inconclusive. It's going to take a few more days. That's what I'm feeling right now. I hope you're feeling better than I am. I want to talk about polls in order to try to attempt to discern some signal about who is going to win presidential race this year. There's certainly good news and bad news for both presidential candidates in the polling. National polls, if you average across all of them, show that Harris has about a 1.5 percentage point lead right now. That's a good sign for Trump because in 2020, Joe Biden needed to have won by about 3.5 percentage points nationally in order to have won that election, given how those national results translated to the Electoral College. And he ended up winning by about 4.3 percentage points, something like that. But, as we know, the national polls don't decide elections. States do in their allocation of electors to the Electoral College. And the state level polls are much more promising for Harris, with small leads. Again, if you average in Wisconsin, Nevada, Michigan, maybe a tie in Pennsylvania. So how can we explain this discrepancy? Well, one possibility is just that the state polls are wrong. Pollsters are maybe just still undercounting Trump's support, just like they did in the Rust Belt in 2016 and 2020. That wasn't the case in all states across the country, but it was in states like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. I'm not sure I buy this argument, and let me give you a couple of reasons for that. One, some of the worst pollsters in 2020 are out of business now. There are fewer people polling right now, and those who did worse are less likely to still be in business. Second, pollsters that remain have adapted their procedures to ensure that they are not missing those Trump voters, such as waiting on partisanship or waiting on past vote. Some have even argued that this could overrepresent Trump voters in those samples, given people's tendency to report that they voted for the winner, Joe Biden, when they actually might not have in 2020. I don't know if I buy that or not, but that's one argument that's out there. Third, the really good pollsters are showing that it's a really close race in these swing states. Those who have been on the top of their game, Marquette in Wisconsin, the New York Times Siena polls, they're showing really tight races in these swing states. And then there's that poll of Iowa, you may have heard, with Harris ahead in Iowa, which no one was expecting. And you can dismiss that, and I partially dismiss it. I don't think she's going to win Iowa. But on the other hand, this is a pollster who's had a lot of success in the past. Just a couple months ago, using the same method, was predicting an 8-point Trump lead in Iowa. And so that suggests maybe something has changed. Okay, the other explanation for the small gap between the swing state and national polls is that we may actually be experiencing true campaign effects this year. Remember 2020, there really was no Biden ground campaign. We were in the midst of a pandemic. Harris has a very small ad advantage in the swing states if you look at broadcast television, but a much larger advantage if you look at digital advertising, radio, local cable, and other forms of advertising. I know my colleague Carolyn is going to talk about her ground game as well. It's well funded, it's expansive. That's a big contrast from Trump's ground game. And so on to predictions. Who's going to be the winner of the presidential election? Harris is going to win with 49.9% of the popular vote, 3%.
49 point what?
9.
Pretty precise, okay.
3% are going to other candidates, with the remaining going to Trump.
Okay, I don't care about them.
She will win 292 votes in the Electoral College. Okay, so why is Harris going to win? She has more money. That's why a better campaign. I would never argue that campaign effects are huge, especially in a presidential election, but it could be worth a percentage point, which this year, given how close we expect this race to be, that could really matter. Second, Trump's theory of the case seems to be that there are a lot of pro-Trump voters out there that he can convince to turn out to vote for him. And he's increasingly made some extreme appeals in order to try to win those voters and convince them to turn out. I'm not convinced, though, that young men are necessarily going to turn out at higher levels than they have in the past. We shall see. There's a poll showing that 56% of the people who have already voted cast ballots for Harris. That's sort of to be expected, as Democrats have emphasized that more than Republicans. But that means Trump is banking on a huge turnout today, and that is backed by not a very good field operation that he put Elon Musk in charge of. There are reasons to be skeptical that high turnout is going to happen. The other part of it is, what are undecided voters going to do? Typically, we expect them to vote for the incumbent party. If it's a good economy, vote for the challenger. If it's a bad economy, all that's kind of muddied this year. Some economic measures look really good, others not so good. Trump had a big advantage earlier in the year on whom people trusted to handle the economy. Harris seems to have neutralized that over the past few weeks, and so it's closer to even at this point. Voters say they want change, but who is the change candidate? Trump is not in power right now, but he was a former president. Harris is part of the current administration, but she's not Biden. In fact, she looks unlike any other president we've had in our past. And so she may be able to take on that mantle of the change candidate that those undecided voters are looking for. Ultimately, Harris's favorability is also just higher than Trump's by about 10 percentage points, depending on the poll. And so I guess my theory of the case is that undecided voters, independent voters, late deciding voters are going to disproportionately vote for Harris, and that'll be enough for the rich. Okay. Other predictions. So 52 Republicans in the Senate, 46 Democrats, 2 independents. U.S. House of Representatives, 218 Democrats, 217 Republicans, which we're gonna, if that's the case, then we won't know this for another 2.5 weeks.
Yep, that's true.
So Washington elections, Governor Ferguson, get used to saying that, 9 percentage points. Senator Cantwell, we're used to saying that, we will continue to say that, 12 percentage points. Lands Commissioner, probably the tightest statewide race on the ballot. I think Dave Upthegrove is going to win by 7 percentage points. The 3rd congressional district winner, I said the incumbent, Lusenkamp Perez, though my colleague actually lives in that district, and so I really defer to Carolyn on that one.
Did you predict? Did you say Perez is going to win?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or Perez is going to win.
Oh, Perez is going to win. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
By.
You
Two votes.
didn't ask for a mark. Yeah. 0.3 percentage.
All right.
4th congressional district. This is a hard one, but I'm going to go with the incumbent Newhouse in this instance. So this is the Republican versus Republican race. And the 5th congressional district.
About how much?
4 percentage points.
4. Okay. Wow.
And Michael Baumgartner for this, the 5th congressional district, going to win by 8.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Travis.
You are welcome.
All right, Carolyn, you're up.
It's hard to follow. I like the mental health check because I think that's accurate, but for me it's relief that I will no longer get texts and phone calls from all the people who want money and want me to vote for them. So I want to talk about why I made the predictions I made by focusing on 3 things, but begin by noting that this is a highly unusual election. We have a convicted felon who's the presidential nominee who made this enormous comeback after the horrible events of January 6th. We've got a vice president who stepped up after the president chose not to run for re-election. We have a situation where debates mattered for the first time since we've seen in a long time in terms of those changes. So it's just an odd election. What we also have is a deeply polarized electorate, which is no surprise to any of you. I think we've been talking about this for a couple of decades. And we have political parties that are changing, where the Democrats are really they're making gains with the suburban voters. The gender gap has gotten quite large, and I think will get significantly larger after this election. And then we have education being much more of a predictor than it has been in the past. So there are 3 reasons why I think Harris is also going to win. And it deals with campaign strategy, GOTV efforts, and then also the gender gap and why it matters. So first, about campaign strategy. One of the things that we've seen, and I think this is because of the polarization, is that both candidates are appealing strongly to their base, which is a natural thing that candidates do. You want to have your base energized and out voting because we can reliably know that they're going to actually vote. Harris has done an attempt to reach out to Republicans, in particular never Trumpers, and has really focused on elite never Trumpers, talking about how they support her campaign, which is, I think, wise, but I'm not so sure there's going to be a lot of crossover. And I think that's a significant issue. One of the things that we also have when you look at the strategy, which I forgot to mention, is we have a very small number of races that are competitive, and we have a very small number of voters that are persuadable. So I think that they've been baked in who's supporting Trump and Harris for a long time, and so this affects campaign strategy. We also, I think, have very few people who are going to split their tickets. This has been a continuation of a trend that we've seen over the last couple of decades, and that affects strategy as well. But back to strategy. Both of them are appealing to their base. Harris, again, doing a little bit in terms of never Trumpers. What the former president is doing, which I think has been long overdue, is reaching out to young men. They are low propensity voters historically. His strategy is to get them to vote, and thinking that that will in some way offset the gender gap. Whether or not he accomplishes it is a different story. The other thing interesting about the strategy is how each of the candidates are focusing on different dominant issues. Harris obviously is focused on reproductive freedom, abortion rights, whereas Trump's focus is on immigration. And so that again is how and why that he's appealing and she's appealing to their base. The other thing, and I think this factors into what's going to happen today, is they have very different tones to their campaign. The former president has ran a very dark, ominous campaign. He has a very, dark vision of America. This is nothing new, but we've seen it get darker over time, which I would argue is an indication that he's losing. Whereas I think the focus on joy and turning the page and change coming from Harris is going to be attractive to a lot of voters who are just tired of what's been going on for a long time. So the other strategy is Harris is focusing on likely voters, more so than Trump, who's again focusing on those low propensity voters, which is a problem. GOTV, I think this is what changes the race and decides it ultimately. Obviously you want to appeal to your base, you want to get them out, and you want to have people knocking on doors, making phone calls, sending text messages for this to happen. Harris has run a traditional...
By the way, GOTV is Get Out the Vote
Sorry,
operations. For those who are not nerds.
So Harris has run a very traditional get out the vote operation where she has opened hundreds of offices in the battleground states. She has paid staffers, which Trump does as well, but she has hordes of volunteers, and that makes an enormous difference because these volunteers are very enthusiastic about their candidate, and so that enthusiasm, I think, makes that GOTV effort much stronger. Trump, on the other hand, and Travis has mentioned this, has really sort of farmed out his GOTV strategy, and I think this is a huge mistake. Turning Point Action, and then Elon Musk's, what's it called? America PAC are the ones who are running the GOTV in the battleground states. They are paid staffers, they're inexperienced, they started late, and their focus is on, again, those low propensity voters. And what we know about low propensity voters is they don't like to vote. And we should go after them, but it's very hard to get them. And what research shows us is that it takes 6 to 7 touches of a low propensity voter to actually get them to vote. And if you started late, if you have inexperienced staff, they're not going to have the effect that I think his campaign.
Unless you give them $1 million.
So there is that. There is that. The other thing is that, and a judge said that it's okay. The state judge did, which was just amazing.
Yeah.
Anyway, the other thing that I would say about GOTV efforts and the campaigns is the former president has really been confusing about his messaging on when people should vote, and I think that is going to have a tremendous effect on low propensity voters. Because if they're hearing confusing messages, they're not getting those 6 to 7 touches, it's not going to swing in his favor. Finally, I want to talk about the gender gap. I think this is going to be over 20 points. And it's not just because Harris is appealing to women, it's because of the focus on reproductive rights. We've seen successes in a lot of state races where abortion rights have been on the ballot. Women are also more likely to be enthusiastic, more likely to vote. They are higher propensity voters as opposed to men. Whereas Trump's strategy is to go on Joe Rogan, whom you may be familiar with, to bring Hulk Hogan out at multiple events, and to sort of have this hyper masculinity, approach, sort of appealing to fellas in that manner. And there is a strategy there. I just don't think it's a winning strategy. It's also not a winning strategy when President Trump says that he's going to protect women whether they like it or not, which was just an amazing statement, and it sounds very ominous, and it shows that he really doesn't seem to understand women. Finally, I'm going to say that my robust predictions are because I'm feeling a lot of momentum on the part of the Harris campaign. I think that momentum is going to bleed into other races, and so if you're a Democrat, I think it's encouraging. Predictions: Harris wins.
All right.
I have it down. I have her winning 52% of the popular vote, 46 to Trump. For the Electoral College, it's a little bit tighter than Travis. I have 276 versus 262. Concession? Oh, were you going to ask about the concession? No. For the Senate control, I have Republicans taking control 52 to 48. The losses will be Tester and Sherrod Brown in Ohio. House majority control will go to the Democrats. 220 to 215. Ooh. And then we get to Washington. Now, I did mine a little bit differently, and I don't want to do math, so I'll make Cornell do it. Governor Ferguson will win 53 to 47.
52 for 6.
Why? See, this is the problem.
Let me get my calculator out.
U.S. Senate, I have 58-42. I think that, that ends up. Lands Commissioner, 53 to 47. Up there. Yeah, sorry. I thought that was obvious.
53 to
47.
53 to 47.
That is 100. That's making me question my own math. For the 3rd Congressional District, I have Kent winning 51-49. So Kent winning by 2. For the 4th Congressional District, I have Sessler winning 53 to 47.
53 to 47. Plus 6?
Yeah. If the math is correct. And with the 5th Congressional District, I have Baumgartner winning 60-40. So 20 points.
60, what's that?
60. 20 points. Plus 20.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, thanks, Carolyn. And finally, we have Todd Donovan.
Okay. I'm gonna not talk about the presidential election for a mental health break just for a second here, and talk about some stuff that's gonna be on the ballot initiatives in about 6-7 states. And then I'll talk about presidential election stuff and do the predictions. But there's been I think we can say it's conventional wisdom now that the polarization in Congress is at all-time highs, and the process of which we're getting people nominated to run as Democratic candidates or Republican candidates in district after district that are heavily one-party Republican or one-party Democrat tend to favor sometimes total nut jobs, but people who are on the far end ideologically of their parties. So what's this got to do with ballot initiatives? There's about $100 million being spent in Alaska, Colorado, Oregon, Nevada, Montana, Arizona, South Dakota, and a bit of money also in Idaho, that are all over measures that would either create a nonpartisan primary system, a top 4, one is a top 2, South Dakota has one to be a top 2 primary system like Washington's, a nonpartisan primary where all voters get the same ballot, all candidates run on the same ballot. Parties often tend to hate this because they lose control of their nominee. But the idea is if you got independents voting in the primaries, they can pick, a moderate Republican versus an extreme Republican in a solidly Republican district, or vice versa with Democrats. The reason these are, and Alaska passed one of these in 2020, it went into effect in 2022, and the only reason Lisa Murkowski is probably still in the Senate unless she was going to run another write-in campaign, but she's able to get through that kind of a primary. Alaska combined that with top 4 going on instead of like what we do here, top 2. And in the general, there's 4 people regardless of party, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, whatever, and a ranked choice voting system. So there's $14 million defending that this year because it's been put up for repeal. The Republican Party is kind of united around opposition to it. There's another $14 million in Colorado being spent over one that is another top 4 primary, nonpartisan primary, top 4, which oddly has, one of these has Jill Stein and Lorena Bolbert opposed to this, and Michael Bennett and some other elites. But the interesting dynamic of these is they're often dealing with like intra-party, like the Idaho one really seems to be the old guard Republicans can't win primaries in Idaho, so the Republican Party in Idaho has just completely shifted even more far right. And the impetus behind that one there is kind of like how do these old guard Republicans get any footing back in the legislature, back in nominations? And in Oregon, it's kind of more like a thing within the Democratic Party. Colorado, you've got it's supported by a lot of Democrats. Very few places these are supported by the parties, but this is something to watch for. There's some weird ones. Montana and Arizona have these where they implement a nonpartisan primary and they leave a separate question about whether to be top 4 or top 2 and how many and whether the legislature figures this out or not. So I mean, if these pass, and this is kind of if they don't pass, this is probably done because the money essentially the money is coming from a group called Unite America, which is funded somehow Research, Truth, and Advertising, which is largely funded by one of the Murdoch's sons' partner, I can't remember her name, and some billionaire guy named John Arnold who funds this Article 4 group, but they're the ones who put the money on these things. So I have no predictions on these, but I think some of those are going to pass, and if they do, that kind of might change the way we do our elections and might really change the way Congress looks in the long run. Okay, it's also on the ballot in Washington, D.C. The presidential election thing, I had my class. I had my class do this, and like 29 people, we averaged out what their predictions were, and they have Harris winning with 50.2. So
well, is this you or your class?
That's my class.
Okay.
And when we sat down, we talked about this, and like, well, I just want her to win. It was kind of one of the. So I do too, but I'm not gonna use. And I guess we heard a lot about campaigns and ground. I try to make these predictions not like presidential campaigns don't really matter that much, or 2016 and 2020 and 2024 wouldn't look the same and the same and the same, give or take 10,000 votes here, 100,000 votes there. So the polling, I mean, my predictions. So my prediction is Trump 48.1, Trump winning the electoral college, but the popular vote at only 48.1. And part of this is because it's the same thing as I don't know why we're going to get a big difference in 2024 that we didn't see in 2020 or 2016. It's going to be super close. There's a lot of wishful thinking maybe going on with the polling that we want to see Ann Salter's tapping into something great here. I will never underestimate the amount of racism and sexism in the American electorate. And I don't know where that's suddenly going to get. We don't often have that combined into one candidate we're doing polling on, so we think about what that's doing for polling. But this, the late deciding thing, that's huge. That's what flipped it in 2016 pretty clearly. But the campaign, I see more of the campaign as Harris is bringing Liz Cheney out on the road to try to convince Republicans to vote for her. I don't know if that's really going to be a thing. I mean, so maybe the ground game is something running much better than that, but that going to Republicans who are not persuadable, I just don't see the campaign effects are going to be that big. So I hope my students are right. They had Harris at 50 and at 270. I have Trump at 281. It's basically whatever it all adds up to if he wins Pennsylvania. So now nobody wants to hear this, right? I don't want to hear that.
Some people do.
I hope I'm wrong. But again, it just comes out like it's a political science thing. How much should we do focus on fundamentals like what's the state of the economy, who's the incumbent party? Political scientists model this stuff back in July, June, they publish them, and most of those forecasts had Trump winning, just based on economic conditions and basic fundamentals. So are the campaigns better then those fundamentals are somehow trumping those fundamentals. I don't know. Okay, so at my side 281 for the Electoral College, I hope I got the math right. That's basically Harris wins everything in the Midwest except Pennsylvania. Trump wins Georgia, Trump wins Arizona, Harris wins Nevada. Party control, Republican majority 51-49. And this gets against, this is just me totally wishful thinking. Democratic majority in the House 218-217. What happens to the president's party in every single midterm?
Can we say the House?
The House, like Democrats 218-217. And as political scientists up here know, the incumbent party always loses seats in the midterm. We all have them gaining seats. The only time this has happened is 2002 and 98. I'm not saying in midterms. In generals, we're not predicting any coattail here. Something I was going to say the House, the president's party always loses seats in the midterm. 2018 kind of bumped up numbers. I think that are. Anyway, that's wishful thinking. I don't think any of us have a really good way to explain that one. Fergie 53, 46, 50 plus 7, Capital plus 18. Plus 4.
Wait a second.
No, you got a plus 4. I got up the grove plus 4. I don't think Carolyn's.
Up the grove. You have plus 4?
Yeah.
I had her up 16.
Okay. Yeah, you got hers
How did I
wrong.
get that wrong?
Because
You need to do math.
Because you put it in the wrong slot.
Did I?
Oh, no.
No?
You made me do math.
You need me to do math.
I just confused myself with the pictures.
Okay.
Third.
Third.
Third, I have Perez plus 4. Fourth, I have Newhouse.
No, third again?
Third plus 4. He has plus 4.
Now he's you need to do math.
You got Perez?
I have.
No. Who do you have?
Perez plus 4.
Perez.
Just doing math.
No. Yes.
Without my computer.
Perez plus 4? You have Trump winning?
Yeah, this is Washington.
Never mind.
Incumbents do better the second time they run, so that's what
Now, can you switch the 292 to 282 under Travis?
he said.
Oh, did he say 292? Oh, you did?
We got it all
Okay,
on
I'm
tape.
sorry, my bad.
All right.
I got, okay.
The fourth,
All
what do you got?
The fourth, Newhouse by 8. And the fifth, Baumgartner by 20.
Okay. Wow. So let's see
Thanks,
where
Todd.
we disagree. We disagree
want that.
on here on Trump. Everyone agrees it's going to be a Republican Senate and a Democratic House. We're going to have divided government again, no matter what happens.
Oh, yeah.
That's good news. Everyone says Ferguson's going to win. Everyone says Campbell's going to win handily. We split on the third. We split on the third, and we split on the fourth. And then we agree on everything else. So those are the ones where we have disagreements. All right.
Where did we split on the fourth? Oh, Carolyn has.
Yeah. She has this one. Oh, it should be down here, I think. I got the wrong one. Okay. All right. So we have some time for
I should have gone first.
some Q&A now. And everyone should take pictures of this so we can remind them in
Oh, yeah.
2 weeks.
We will.
I did ask him one other prediction, and that is to predict whether or not there will be a presidential concession in the next 3 weeks before the Electoral College votes.
I put ha 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 ha. There's no way he will ever concede. Unless, of course, he wins.
I put 51% because if Harris loses and it's clear she will concede. 49%. No, there won't be concession.
You think there will be?
Well, it's a
Trump's sworn in now. So she says ha 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 because she doesn't think Trump's doing it. Jeff?
I'm gonna take the easy way out and say it depends on who wins.
Okay, all right. All right, questions? Yeah, Amy.
Of course, I have to ask the A question. Abortion referendum. Initiatives, you didn't mention those
Yeah,
at
I mean-
all, and the impact on voting.
Would expect to increase turnout more in a midterm election than a presidential election, but I mean, that's a couple, and that would be numbers in favor of boosting turnout by 1% maybe for Democrats in the states it's on the ballot. So is it on the ballot in states where that's gonna be 1% that'll bring out some fraction of Democrats that'll be pivotal? And I'm just trying to go through, of the battleground
Right,
states.
the
like-
battleground, we're talking about battlegrounds.
Yeah. But
There was some discussion of split ticket voting, and you said no, in the sense that Republicans would vote for, there could be a scenario where Republicans would vote in favor of the abortion referendum, but still do Republican tickets. Is that something?
yeah, I think it's possible. I think the more interesting thing for the national election is how much would that increase
Right,
turnout.
so it maybe won't, oh, the turnout, right?
It'll increase turnout. I think the people more mobilized by that would be people who are going to be more likely to vote Democratic. But is it in the states where it's going to make a difference?
Thank you.
Can I ask about a prediction when the Supreme Court will actually end the last election case?
2028.
I just wanted very quickly to have an assessment of the Trump killing of the border compromise. The Harris brought it up to a certain extent. Your sense of how good or bad the use of that fact was, and why wasn't it more effective?
I don't think it was effective. I don't think it matters. I think that Trump's support on the immigration is baked in. They wouldn't blame him for that at all. Is that what you're assuming? That
I suppose so, but I wasn't so much thinking sort of base as the fact that that campaign has repeatedly used it. That is the border disaster. Their quotes, and is your sense that that thing has worked in some way, or are people just dismissing it, or?
maybe at the margins, I don't think it's worked. It should, but I don't think it is.
Well, I think it's a good issue for the Trump campaign, and that's probably why it's one of the things they're emphasizing. Having said that, if you look at the polling, their advantage on that issue is not as large as it was 4 months ago. And so again, Harris has somewhat neutralized that issue, not completely, and so it's a good issue for the Trump campaign, not as good as it was though.
Let me ask you guys, all talked about polls, let me ask you about the Ann Social poll that came out in Iowa.
Yeah.
That was a shock to everybody. And she's amazingly accurate, and the reason she's accurate, or has been in the past, is because she doesn't weight her data the same way other pollsters do based on previous elections. Right, so she's not backward looking, she's forward looking. And the advantage to that in this particular race may be the fact that the electorate has changed a lot since 2022 in Dobbs, in particular with women being more motivated to come out and vote. And that is maybe what she's picking up, right? Because she's only polling voters who either had already voted or said they're definitely going to vote. And then she didn't weight that data after that into a representative sample. So what do you guys make of that? Do you think are the other polls, because most of the other pollsters weight backward looking, could be off by 2 or 3 percentage points?
I think Seltzer is onto something. She runs a real risk of what a lot of other pollsters, the problem they had in 2016, even in 2020, of missing a bunch of Trump voters. I think she's lucky in that she polls in Iowa, which is a relatively homogeneous state. It's a state with relatively high social capital. You don't necessarily have the split of Trump voters who want to burn down the whole system and therefore aren't going to respond to any pollster that you might find elsewhere. You know, I think she hasn't changed her method. It's the same method she's been using. Maybe it'll come to bite her this time, but it has been pretty good in the past.
What about
We
you?
were discussing this earlier,
Because
but
that would wreck your prediction here.
no, I mean, there's all this, especially after 2016, and even right now, we're still having the same conversation that the polls are missing something,
Yeah.
and all my friends are really hoping the polls are missing something. But they weren't bad in 2016. They were spot on. They were better in 2016 than they were in 2012. It's just that within the margin that made people think a candidate who was going to win lost. Obama wasn't supposed to win by as much as he did, and he did. And there was not a lot of polling in the upper Midwest states in the last week. And journalists took that and said there was a certainty that Clinton would win, and the pollsters get blamed. So how bad the polls are, I'm not really sure, but the underrepresentation of lower educated voters, so that's what we're trying to correct for in 2020. So we overcorrected for that in 2024, and now we have.
Well, it's not just overcorrecting. I mean, so the polls have been bad in 2022. They predicted a red wave.
Yeah.
Never occurred. And they were bad in all of the special elections since. Under predicting Democratic turnout and under predicting the women's vote, right? So Dobbs fundamentally changed the election since 2022, and Seltzer may be picking that up where the other pollsters are not picking that. They haven't waited for that.
Anyone want to predict Trump winning Iowa?
Sure.
Yeah, let's hear that, yeah.
I don't think Trump's going to win Iowa.
He's not?
Think he's gonna lose Iowa?
Yeah,
Trump?
That would be a shock.
No, no,
So
I-
Seltzer. Yeah.
Anyone good? Anyone good for Harris?
No.
Trump is going to win Iowa by like 6 weeks.
You think by 6?
At least.
All right. Yeah.
Looking at the electoral college numbers, I'm sure some people could look at them and say, I know exactly which states you put in there, but I don't. So I'm curious, like, I know Todd has Pennsylvania, but Travis and Carolyn, what states are you looking at for those electoral?
So the traditional blue wall, which is Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, I had going for Harris. And then, I don't know, also known as the Rust Belt, I think they call it. And then the Sun Belt would be Nevada and Arizona and Georgia and North Carolina. So those are the seven ones. And I think we have Harris winning, we both had Harris winning Nevada
Right.
and also Pennsylvania.
You have a waiting event?
And North Carolina.
Yeah,
Oh, you did
Kessler
North
had that.
Carolina?
Yeah.
Oh, that's the difference between them.
The North Carolina, yeah.
Yeah, I had Trump winning North Carolina, Trump winning Georgia, Trump winning Arizona, Harris winning Nevada, Harris winning Wisconsin, Michigan, and Trump winning Pennsylvania.
That's the big difference.
And I can't get my map up, but I think that's how I got to the number.
All right, Nick?
So in the very unlikely event of an electoral college tie, how do you guys think that plays out? Whoever wants to touch that one.
I have to rewatch Veep.
It goes to the House of Representatives, which would choose the next president.
Which would be Trump.
Which would probably be Trump, yeah, because Republicans control more state delegations than Democrats do right now.
Going back to the Iowa poll, I know Carolyn, you touched on the gender gap, but one of the reasons I saw about why Iowa was predicted to go for Harris was because there's supposed to be a bigger middle-aged white women turnout, voters there, and specifically in Iowa. What are your guys' thoughts on that demographic's role in this election, not just in Iowa, especially with how hard Harris has pushed that women, your votes are private, your husband doesn't need to know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that strategy is good or not. I think it's an interesting strategy, but no, I think women who look like me are the ones who are going to deliver the White House to Harris. Because we vote often, we have friends who we get to vote, we're high propensity voters, so I think it's significant, but I don't want to dismiss how important youth vote is in terms of women. Women, younger voters, are also going to be really significant in this election because of the abortion issue primarily, and so that's the combination as to why. So I don't think it's just the middle-aged women, I think it's young women as well.
Let me ask you one other thing then. All of you don't think that the strategy of trying to peel off Republican voters by Harris is gonna work very well. But the last data I saw on likely Republican voters, Trump support was under 90%. This is high 80s, 89%, 88%. That'd be significant. You know, if he's not above 90% with Republican voters, that could be very significant, don't you think? I mean, that's got to indicate something, or not?
I mean, I think partisans come home.
Yeah.
But if her strategy of campaigning with Liz Cheney makes some independent voters think, oh, she's not a crazy leftist, I think it's okay to vote for her. That's where it may be helpful, even if she isn't getting traditional Republicans to vote for her.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
This is a question specifically for Todd because of the, I guess, prediction of Trump winning. In particular with Trump winning in some, at least key states, I think you said you see Pennsylvania in particular going through. How much of an impact do you see, young voters and in particular, but even older voters who maybe were not specifically swayed by either candidate and decided to either not vote or vote third party? How much do you see that playing into a predicted Trump victory?
It'd be the not voting probably more. I don't. In 2016, the voting for a third party was much bigger with younger voters in some of those close states. I mean, I think we could make an argument that if you can assume those voters would have gone Democratic, because that age demographic votes overwhelmingly Democratic, but you can't always assume they're going to vote for any Democrat. But but now there's the Green and Libertarian option is just way less visible. There's way less people saying they're undecided than in 2016. I mean, it was like 13% in some of those upper Midwest states in 2016, and now it's like, what, 3?
Yeah, pretty small.
So I think the third party thing's less of a factor this year. But who turns? When turnout changes, if turnout increases significantly in any presidential elections, it's young people it's not like you're going. There's a ceiling effect for old folks, they're all voting, we're all voting. But when you see 2004, one of the biggest turnouts we had between previous presidential elections, it was people under 30 that made up the difference in terms of turnout.
What do you guys predict on turnout?
Yeah.
Do you think we're going to be closer to 2016 or 2020?
2020.
2020 is the highest
67,
turnout.
was it 66? Maybe 66, 68. I think Washington's gonna be low 80s.
And is this kind of like the 2018 version of a presidential election where that was the highest turnout we ever had as kind of a reaction to Trump? You didn't ask us that, so I didn't. Answer the questions early.
It's not on the teleprompter?
But I think it's going to be high.
So let me ask you this, and I'll ask Carolyn and Travis. I'm interested, and then I'll ask Todd a different question. Well, same question, but different. Because I'm really curious about party alignments and what's taking place in party alignments. Okay, so let's say that Harris wins, because you guys predict that. What happens to the Republican Party? And I'm going to ask Todd, if Trump wins, what happens to the Democratic Party?
You go first.
Wait a second. What do the parties look like in terms of their composition?
Yeah. What happens to the MAGA movement within the Republican? If Harris wins, Trump loses again. What happens to the Republican Party? Does the MAGA movement go away? Does it transform or transmute itself? Is a third party led by Liz Cheney or someone else emerge?
I think Trump is unique in many ways, and I think that he's the MAGA movement. So for the next 4 or 5 years, he's still going to be the head of the MAGA movement. He's not going away. He may not be running for office, but he's going to want to be a kingmaker. Republicans are going to have to get his blessing as they have in the past. So I think it doesn't die out immediately because he's still going to play a role.
I think you're right. MAGA candidates don't do all that well. Political scientists has looked at this, and that, acting in that style, associating with that movement, reduces your vote by about 3 or 4 percentage points. We'll probably see it in Arizona with Kerry Lake losing a state that Trump's probably going to win. I think the more interesting question for me is if there were a generic Republican who was the Republican nominee for president this year, how much better, if any, would that candidate be than Trump? And part of me wants to say a Republican would easily win this presidential race if it were someone other than Donald Trump.
That's what the fundamentals say, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Totally.
All the fundamentals say that. It should be a Republican landslide, right? Anyways, okay, so what happens to the Democrats? Because Harris has tried to move the party to the middle, obviously, right?
Yeah, which people do in the general election, just generally for normal except for Trump, like you can see that. I don't think it would change. I mean, the Republicans are much more two parties in one shell right now than the Democrats are. The Democrats' problem is maybe more they just don't have a bench in terms of people who might be viable presidential candidates because the party cleared the field in 2016, they cleared the field in 2020, and they had no contest in 2024. So what happens is you'll get actually, contests for being the perceived leader of the party that hasn't happened since 2008. That's important, and that makes, I don't say that's a silver lining. There's no silver lining if she loses. But I think, the weird thing with the Republicans is Trump's not going, like Liz Cheney, Mitt Romney, Jeb Bush, John McCain, those folks, they have no presence in the party anymore. They're not coming back. That kind of thing is not going to be dominant in that party. Where does it go in our two-party system? There's not going to be a new third party. Like what happens to the non-Freedom Caucus folks in the Republican Party if Trump loses? Do they get somehow more traction to bring those folks back in? That's really hard to see happening.
It's such an interesting question because Trump has lost multiple elections for his party, and they still embrace him. And so it's hard to think that his influence is going to go away because of that. And so looking at the future is really hard with him, because people are just, they stick with him.
But if he loses this election in an election cycle, the Republicans should be walking away with it.
But he will say he didn't lose.
Well,
He will say that he won.
Did he say today this was his last election?
That's what he said.
Or was it the last election?
This is the last time he will run, he said it's very sad. Yeah, in the back.
Very sad.
Sorry, how much do you guys think of Tim Walz' VP affected Harris, especially in the Rust Belt, compared to like Shapiro?
I don't think empirically we know that the vice president has any effect on the ticket except maybe in a home state, and even that's so.
Yeah, I'm just curious because as soon as Walz was announced, the polling seemed to favor Harris versus.
Would she do better in Pennsylvania? Shapiro was, that's the only place where maybe.
Someone tried to quantify it, and it was 3/10
Point
of a
three.
percentage point. But if she loses Pennsylvania by 1/10 of a percentage point, there will be a lot of regret.
Oh, wait, you already asked one, we could. Back there.
Perfect. My question is for Carolyn and your prediction about the 3rd congressional district. I just wonder, what do you think has changed since 2022? And, do you see any similarities between your campaign in 2020 and the one right now in 2020?
Yeah, I've been talking about this.
For those who don't know, Carolyn ran as a candidate in that district twice.
Lost twice too.
I didn't say that.
Shouldn't say it. One of the things that I found interesting in the 3rd is how much 2020 differed than 2018 in terms of how many voters. There were 100,000 additional voters in 2020 than there were in 2018. That is a massive influx of voters. And what happened in my campaign in 2020 was they went strongly Republican. I don't think that's changed. And Marie's done a fantastic job going to the middle, trying to attract Republicans, showing that she's a moderate. I think it's a really good strategy, but it's also come at the risk of really making some Democrats unhappy and key Democratic coalitions in the third. So that's why I believe Kent is going to win. He also has a better ground game. Now, I'm probably wrong because she has $10 million and he only has $2 million, but it just feels that it's going to be a loss because I think her win was so unexpected. I mean, it was just sort of a unique situation for her to prevail because Rhea Butler ended up not advancing, and then you've got Kent closely aligned with Trump. But I think it's a Republican district. It's a 52% Trump district, and if that holds, then Kent, who's very much a Trump supporter, is probably going to prevail. I think if you want to win the third, you have to win Clark County by 55%. And she won it by, I think, 51 or 52 in 2018. And so I'm not seeing that jump up that much.
On the flip side of Cornell's question, if Trump does win, what do we think a post-Trump Republican Party looks like? Will he just like remain god of the GOP until his death, or?
You could kind of see that people were trying to run against him in the last cycle, or in this cycle, that they were just still being trumped. Mm-hmm. And so if he's gone, do they still, like DeSantis was just trying to be not even a Trump light, just a Trump louder or something. So I think that still has a lot of gravity in the party. That's not the best word for it.
And Don
Traction.
Don runs in 2028.
He's gonna be 82, I
Donald
think
Trump.
Mother Nature will be
John Jr.
It's a different party now.
All right, we have time for one more. If anyone's got it, right back here. All right.
It's really unique about the collection, aside all the other things, is that you can actually like bet on it. So I'm wondering if any of you have put like your money.
Not a dime.
They are cheap political scientists, all of them.
But there is this argument that these betting markets,
Yes, the betting
Polly, whatever, that they show a Trump win, and that some people argue is more accurate than people like us and folks who do the research. But so I mean, it's actually a really interesting question. But no.
Pennsylvania voters could be like, I want to make money. I want to put money on Harris and then vote Harris because it's a bigger payout if Harris wins.
Okay, I think our time is up. Before I ask you to thank our panelists, we have one more event in this series. That's next week, next Tuesday, same time, same place. We have Samara Klar, who's at the University of Arizona. She's written extensively on political polarization and American democracy. So she's going to come in and tell us the implications of the election, either way it goes, for polarization and democracy in America. So that should be very good. I encourage you to come out to that. And now, join me in thanking our panelists for our interest in